And hello, welcome to Social Justice Forums. I am Daren, Jaime. We thank you for joining us. Now, if you're asking the question, what is the show all about? We bring you a forum discussing and providing a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities that so many people face, things such as systemic inequality to pressing social problems. Our guests provide multiple perspectives and insights, helping us to better understand and address these challenges. We invite you to stay connected to us. The Social Justice Forum starts now. And we are back on May 13th, 1985. Philadelphia's MOVE organization faced a devastating police assault, resulting in the deaths of 11 people, including 5 children, and left hundreds homeless. The tragic event, which was broadcast live and made international headlines, has long been overshadowed and neglected in public memory. Our guest today is an insider with a unique perspective on this forgotten story. His story is chronicled in a new compelling memoir that not only revisits the MOVE bombing, but also sheds light on systemic racism, police brutality, and the fight for human rights. Joining us is author Mike Africa Jr. Mike, good to have you back.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the time.
Hey, listen, I appreciate you. And for people who may not be so familiar with MOVE, just let's walk through MOVE before we get to that fatal day.
The MOVE organization was founded by my great uncle, John Africa. He started the organization with the mission to protect life, people, animals, and the environment. And having that mission, he ran across a lot of adversity, similar to what the Black Panthers faced when they started talking about fighting for equal rights and civil liberties, same as Dr. King, Malcolm X, and all the others.
Yeah.
And so the MOVE organization met the same issues.
I used to tell people that when it came to MOVE, we're very familiar with PETA and the PETA organization. But long before PETA, there was MOVE actually making a difference out there.
Absolutely. The MOVE organization and the animal rights front definitely predates PETA. I don't know if PETA was inspired by MOVE, but I know that the MOVE organization got a lot of attention for the protest that they did at the Philadelphia Zoo and against Barnum and Bailey Ringling Brothers Circus, and even furriers that were cutting the fur off of animals and putting them on people's backs. So definitely MOVE predates a lot of those organizations.
Yeah. And so now, Mike, you decided to write this memoir, really detailing the organization, your parents, the work that's gone on. Why did you decide that it was time to write this memoir?
To be honest with you, I decided to write this memoir because it had never been done. No one had ever written a book about MOVE from our perspective. Ramona Africa was the person that survived the bombing, and she spent 7 years in prison. And during the time that she was in prison and her 30 plus years home from prison, she never wrote a book about the MOVE organization. My aunt, who wrote John Africa's guidelines for him since he was pretty much illiterate, she did not write a book about the history of MOVE. And it was kind of like the story of Dory Miller. If you're not familiar with Dory Miller, he was a cook on a naval ship. And during the war, his fleet was being attacked by kamikazes from Japanese airships. And he found himself on the gun firing and shooting down kamikazes. And if he had not done that, we might all be speaking Japanese. But when he was asked the question, why did you get on the gun? You are a cook. How did you wind up shooting? And he said, I did what had to be done. And that's how I feel about this book. We complained as MOVE members, we complained about the unfair treatment we got in the media, the disparities. The media didn't treat us right. They didn't tell the truth about what happened. And here we are with the opportunity to tell the truth, and we never did it in a book form. So I decided that it should be done, and therefore I did it.
Yeah. So for people who may not be so familiar, take us back to that day and the day of the bombing.
Well, the bombing was a lead up from what happened 7 years earlier. The city of Philadelphia and MOVE clashed because of the protests, because of the mayor, Frank Rizzo, and his treatment of Black people and poor people in the city. And the clash led to a verbal confrontations, jail sentences, and then eventually a physical confrontation where Philadelphia police officers came to Move's house. They raided the house. They shot tear gas, water cannons from the fire department, bullets, and then they took a bunch of people to jail, including my parents. During the shooting, a cop was killed, and my family was blamed for it. My parents, including 7 other people, were sentenced to 100 years in jail. The other Move members that were on the street were protesting to get my parents and the other people freed from prison. And the city's response to the protesting that Move did was to drop a bomb on them. So on May 13th, 1985, they flew a helicopter over the house. They shot 10,000 rounds of ammunition at this house, which is a row house, which is a resident in a residential neighborhood, which is surrounded by hundreds of other houses. They dropped the bomb. The bomb ignited a fire. They decided to let the fire burn. And at the end of it, 11 people were dead, including 5 children.
For yourself, what was you know, the biggest moment for you in terms of looking back that day, remembering what went on? Talk to us about your most vivid takeaway there.
I saw the smoke. I saw the fire as it was happening. And I knew everybody that was in the house. While you see it happening, you don't really know what's happening. You don't really know who's in the house. You don't really know if they're going to survive or not. And the biggest takeaway for me was the city of Philadelphia dropped a bomb. I don't know any police. I don't know if other police departments in the country have access to C4. I don't know if other police departments around the country have access to armor-piercing anti-tank guns or 50 caliber machine guns. The type of artillery that was used against Move was weapons of war. And I've seen the Rambo movies, I've seen the violent movies where people are fighting and they're shooting and all of these things are happening. But to see it happen to my family, knowing that they were just fighting to free the people that were in prison. And, I know that the lifestyle of Move was different than most people. Raw food is popular now, but it wasn't back in the 80s. Dreadlocks are popular now, but it wasn't back in the 80s. And then Move wasn't always so kind to the neighbors with the bullhorn blaring at 2 o'clock in the morning, yelling for their prisoners to be freed. You know, but to see a bomb drop, to see people burned alive and shot as they're trying to flee from a burning building, I thought that was a little much. I didn't think the punishment fit the crime.
Yeah. Talk about punishment and crime. Your parents, about 40 years in prison, and you had to go without your parents for about 40 years in prison. How do you make the transition to live life without parents for 40 years, knowing the work that they did, and then yet and still the work that they did, and how they had to really just suffer these consequences for being a community advocate?
Yeah, it's really hard to accept that as a result of you trying to make a better way, your life ends up harsher, harder than it should be, harder than it needs to be. But I guess that's the cost of doing business in this society. You protest and you try to go against the status quo, and there are consequences for that. And my parents understood what that was going into it. And as a person that was raised in the organization, in a revolutionary group around so many others that are similar, I know a lot of Black Panther Party members and their children. I know a lot of members of the civil rights movement and their children. So we all went through this thing together. So you understand that these are consequences. Is it fair? No. Would you like for things to be different? Yes. But this is what it is. So until we get these changes, where we can have fair treatment with the justice system, a lack of racism in our communities, no disparities, where we won't have to fight for DEIs and affirmative action. Until we reach those points, we're going to face these consequences.
Yeah. And so, how do you work to create the awareness for people about the legacy of both your parents, the organization? You've got this memoir out there. What are you hoping that people are actually going to take away after reading this?
The takeaway from me, well, there are two takeaways. One is that we really need to deal with this thing called qualified immunity. I think the biggest injustice in this whole thing with the bombing of Move is that none of the people that were involved in dropping the bomb, letting the fire burn, shooting 10,000 rounds of ammunition, none of them were ever punished. There's never been 1 minute of jail time. None of them felt the cold handcuffs on their wrists. They never saw the back of a paddy wagon. And I think that that is so unfair and it's such a terrible example to set for other people. I think that if you and if anyone, I don't care who you are or where you're from, if you took a helicopter and flew it over somebody's house and dropped a bomb and tried to and then shot at them as they tried to leave a burning building, you'd never see the light of day again if you live to be able to see again. And I think that for police to be able to get away with this type of agreed, I mean, children were shot as they tried to leave a burning building by police officers. And so the takeaway should be we should not allow law enforcement to commit these types of crimes and then officials, protect them. And that's not an attack on the law enforcement community. That's a protection for the citizens in the community. We should, hold police officers to a higher standard. They're there to protect us, and they shouldn't be there to shoot us down.
Yeah.
The other takeaway, though, I think that throughout this whole process, there's a story of myself in trying to make sure that I maintain a level of sanity. It's really hard to live life, period. But without your parents and with abuse happening all around you, you have to develop a thick skin and a clear understanding of how to be happy and take care of yourself. And so there's a lot of people out there that might feel unconfident, they might feel hopeless at times, but just know like there's a lot of people out there that are overcoming the obstacles and overcoming the adversity, and I'm one of them. It would not be a surprise if Mike Africa Jr. ended up in jail or a drug addict or a murderer, but I'm not. And I've made it to this point, and that's because I understand that happiness is a choice, and I want to inspire people that are struggling with these issues to be happy.
But how has this impacted you, Mike? Because when you talk about your parents, the bombing itself, reliving their prison sentence. I've often said on this show, if a person is incarcerated, it's not just that person that's incarcerated, it's the whole family that's incarcerated. There's a whole lot of people that have been impacted, and for yourself, that's times two, right? Now you've got the bombing, you've got your parents, you've got the justice, the component of there is no justice because we've seen bombs, we've seen this, and no one has been held accountable. So the question is, what kind of long-term impact has this had, other than turning you into a great voice and a spokesperson and an advocate? What kind of impact has this been?
Oh man, I've been through my depression days. I've been through my anger days. When I was a kid, I used to dream about being older so that I could go out and kill the people that killed my family. I used to wish God gave me the gift of speed so that I could speed up my life so that I could be an adult and buy weapons and kill the people that killed my family. And at a certain point, I realized that wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't solve anything. And that the best opportunity that I have to make a change is to be the best person that I can be and try to, exemplify the type of behavior, the type of person that I thought that these people should be. And I have my personal struggles with, like I said, depression and anger, but I believe that happiness is a choice, and that choice comes with creating and building the foundation for the happiness that you want, and then working toward it. And even though I have these things in my mind, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about my family members. But I think that since they did not get a chance to live their life out, I think it would be doing a disservice to them, and it would be very disrespectful to those children who didn't have a choice for me to be dissatisfied and unhappy, not taking the opportunities in life to be happy when they didn't get a chance to be happy. So I think about them in this regard. And I think about all the people that might be dealing with some of these other issues that I might be able to help with my story.
So when we talk about your story, it's going to go down, as in history. We know that already. It's already historical. But when we think about other stories, the George Floyd story, and then I juxtaposed both of those. When you look at George Floyd and you look at what went on with Move, were you encouraged by what you saw? Were you scared by what you saw, given the fact that it didn't go so well on your side? Were you worried about how the George Floyd movement might have saw a similar result?
I think that, John Africa, the founder of Move, he would say the system is controlled by pressure. And I think that without the pressure of people burning down things and fighting and reacting the way they reacted to the George Floyd killing, I think that Derek Chauvin would still be walking the street right now. And in fact, one of the officers that was a part of the George Floyd killing, it has just been released from prison either today or yesterday. So I think the system hasn't changed much. The fact that Tamir Rice was 12 years old and shot down, this cop shot him before he even stopped his car. And there was no consequences for him. Daren Wilson, who killed Mike Brown, all of these cases came after a Move. No consequences for the police officers, no accountability, and all they have to do is say that they feared for their life or they were nervous, they were scared, and they get off with, sometimes the other police officers do fundraisers for them so that and during their time of need, they're taken care of. And I think it's a real slap in the face to the community who are supposed to be protected by these people, but are actually being killed by these people. I don't think any changes actually happened for the better at all.
Yeah. Mike, we're down to the last minute in this segment, but I do want to take the time, first of all, to say thank you. Thank you for taking the time to share with us your journey. Thank you for being so candid and letting us know. And also thank you for the work that you're doing as being a voice for the voiceless, even still to this day. You had plenty of reason to sit down on the sideline, but the fact is you are in the game full throttle. And just want to thank you for taking the time and doing that. For people who want to get this memoir and get the opportunity to find out more about Move, what do they do?
They can go to www.mikeafricajr.com and press the order button. It's also on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. If you check Barnes & Noble, I was just there. It's in the history section. So you might want to make sure you ask for the history section.
Yeah. Well, the truth is, it's American history and it is world history. Those bombings will go down. We remember that. We remember Tulsa. There's a lot that we can really go back and say we've got history in short order that is painful, but yet at the same time needs to be remembered because in order to know where you're going, you got to know where you came from. Mike Africa, my brother, thank you for coming and being with us, man.
Thank you for having me. See you next time.
Yes, sir. We'll talk soon. And we do have to take a quick break. We'll have more on social justice right after this.
19.7% of Bronxites currently experience food insecurity. Meanwhile, instead of these nice, colorful foods, this is the best food that they have access to. If this sounds like you, there are a bunch of resources to get healthy food for free or cheap. If you want to help, you might consider donating or volunteering in one of these places. Community fridges like this one are all over the city, and allow New Yorkers to conveniently donate extra food to people who might need it. Go to this link and find your nearest one. Food banks and pop-up events like these provide millions of healthy meals to families in need. These organizations are distributing meals to Bronxites as we speak, and are always accepting donations and volunteers.
And welcome back. In Tucson, Arizona, a Superfund site from the post-war era has irreversibly impacted an aquifer, significantly affecting the nearby Mexican-American community. Our next guest guides us through her book, Exploring It, Concept of a Disabled Ecology, where human and natural vulnerabilities intertwine amidst ecological degradation. Here now to join us is the author of Disabled Ecologies, Lesson from a Wounded Desert, Sonara Taylor. And Sonara, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Daren. I'm really excited to be here and just really love the whole concept of your show. So thank you.
No, thank you. It's a great opportunity to really talk and discuss. And when we talk about this here, disabled ecologies, want to talk a little bit about that. Break it down for us for somebody who may not be so familiar.
Absolutely. Okay, so maybe the best way for me to sort of start introducing people to the concept is actually with my own personal story. So I was born disabled and raised with the understanding that my disability emerged from or was caused by contamination on the south side of Tucson, defense industry contamination from Hughes aircraft, which then became Raytheon. And so, I've always been curious about what happened. We moved away when I was quite young. And so I wanted to better understand this contamination and this history. But also, having this sort of origin story really helped me think about disability and environment in particular ways. So from a really young age, I understood that disability was something that wasn't just a personal problem, right? That is a problem that is, that's something that is caused by and can be caused by, social inequality, pollution, war, environmental racism. And I also had an understanding that nature, right, isn't something separate from us, that human beings can be harmed, of course, by the same things that are harming nature. And so it's really those concepts that I'm exploring in this book. So I went back to Tucson, moved back to Tucson with my family, and really wanted to better understand what had happened. And I found that sort of following the various trails of disability was one way of doing that. So the disablement that impacted the human beings and community who were impacted, right? As you said in your intro, largely Mexican American community, the illnesses and impairments that impacted the wildlife, the ecosystems, those. And so a disabled ecology to me is almost a way of mapping that kind of human and non-human injury that can emerge from these sites of harm.
Yeah, and you broke down the definition in a great way, because I think now we have a better understanding about it. But take us to Tucson and take us there, because we have this community in Tucson, Arizona, and you have the contamination of the aquifer. What can you tell us about this and how this really all played out?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I was so surprised to find, right? My family had a lot of privilege. We were white, we were upwardly mobile. So we moved once from that neighborhood. Once, we found out that there was contamination. My parents moved. I was, of course, only very young. And so I didn't grow up with with this sort of sense of what was actually happening there. And when I moved back to Tucson, what I found, which was so amazing to me, was that there was a whole incredible environmental justice movement that emerged in response to the contamination, and in fact, it was one of the earliest environmental justice movements in the country. So they formed in 1985. So what happened essentially is that there was, all sorts of aircraft industry that had moved into Tucson in the post-war era. And they just started, essentially dumping their toxic chemicals onto the desert ground in, along fences and desert washes. And then eventually Hughes aircraft built these huge lagoons, but they weren't lined. They didn't put any sort of lining, and they dumped their contaminants in there. And so, of course, what's going to happen is, those contaminants are going to sink into the desert ground and eventually reach Tucson's groundwater. And that groundwater, made its way into the drinking water of the community. Like so many other cases of environmental racism, what was really, also, so horrendous was the response of city officials who, even once they learned of, that certain wells were contaminated, they didn't do the work to figure out who potentially had been drinking that water. Once it really came to public light, thanks to community organizing and a really amazing investigative journalist, Jane Kay, then the city officials, essentially blamed the community, saying that they were already predisposed to illness or were sick because of their lifestyle, right? These extremely racist and ableist kind of ways, accusations, and kind of ways of dismissing the community's concerns.
Yeah, and so one thing to mention is you have a Mexican American population that actually lives right above this here, and so
Yes.
how are they impacted by this?
Yeah, so they were the most impacted, right? They drank this water, they bathed in this water, they played in this water. I have a lot of the people who I spoke to, who, of course, this was the 80s, and so a lot of them are retired in their kind of retired years now. And they remember being children, just playing in the desert washes, having no idea that there were tons of contaminants coming through. So people experience a variety of cancers, of different, significant illnesses and diseases. Lupus. There was particularly really high rates of testicular cancer, but a whole variety of conditions. And that was actually part of it was kind of used against the community that there was such a broad range of illnesses and birth issues that emerged from this contamination, because the polluters essentially said that, all of these conditions can't be caused by this by this one contamination, source of contamination, but of course they could be. So
Yeah. And when we talk about this, I understand that this is prevalent in areas where there's little to no voices that are really speaking up and speaking out. I'm reminded of Flint, Michigan. I've done
Absolutely.
extensive work there, and these sound synonymous, right?
Yeah.
What can we do as a community? Because while we're talking Tucson, Arizona, there's Flint, Michigan. You got parts of New York. I can take you to upstate New York. I can take you even downstate, where there's questions and concerns that that arise on the similar side of this. What can we do to be more hyper vigilant on this?
It's so agonizing, because one of the reasons why I actually decided to investigate in Tucson is not only because of my personal connection to it, but on one level because it's so typical, right? You're totally right that these sorts of stories are all over, where I am too, in the Bay Area. And so, what I find so sort of hopeful is the amazing organizing that comes out of these communities. So Tucsonans for a Clean Environment, which was the group that emerged in response to this contamination, they had this really radical, expansive vision of justice that I think that we can all learn from. And that, again, I think is actually a lot of communities fighting these kinds of issues have a similar kind of a vision, and a lot that we can learn from, and sort of what they're calling for, right? So, a call for the polluters to be held to account, a call for there to really be a grappling with the racism and class inequality that leads to these neighborhoods and communities being kind of seen as sacrifice zones in the first place. A call for the landscapes that are impacted to be treated with care, and of course a call for community members to also receive care and treatment, right? To also not be left decades later still dealing with their illnesses and conditions without without kind of healthcare, right? So I think that, in terms of what can be done beforehand, I think that we all have to be really attentive to when corporations are trying to move in, when they're trying to get away with, not following certain kinds of our regulations around toxicity and stuff like that are not good enough, but especially when corporations can get away with not even following what actually already exists. But I also think that it's really important to think about prevention, of course, but also what we can do as as a community to really think about what these communities who already have been impacted need. And a lot of the time, I think that healthcare is the issue that continuously remains. So something like a universal healthcare could help with that sort of dynamic as well.
Yeah. So, what kind of things are we advocating for now as we talk about the work that you're doing? Let's get to the advocacy component. What are you advocating for?
Well, I think I just said one of them, universal healthcare. These broad kinds of policies that could just help support communities in all sorts of ways. Could be a way of addressing these kinds of harms that come from contamination as well, right? So, but I also think that there needs to be a whole shift in the way that we're thinking about the relationship between like harm to the environment and harm to human beings. And sort of, we're so used to thinking about, environmental remediation as something that's over here, and then human health as being something that's over here in a separate arena, right? But what we see again and again, like look all around us, right? The hurricanes, the fires, all the ways in which human beings are just completely implicated, and our health is completely impacted by these dynamics. And so I think really taking climate policy seriously, right? A Green New Deal would go a long way to address so many of these issues. So, this book isn't specifically, I'm not a policy person, so I can't specifically say this and
Right.
this and this. But I think that those kind of broad, really reconfigurations of the way that we're thinking about what's important in society would be would be really helpful.
I need to be transparent for a moment and say that, I'm thinking about the fact of when I think about, environmental relationships and I think about environmental injustice, it doesn't always come to mind disability, and here we are, and you're doing a great job of causing people not to rethink, but to honestly think about this. And I mean, I really had to give it some thought, particularly after I think about Flint, Michigan. I think about a lot of the disability that came out of that with people who have, complications with lead and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Same thing happening right now, in Tucson. What can we do to raise and amplify the voice? That way people can become more familiar and be able to link disability with environmental relationships.
Well, I think you're exactly right for us to just look around. Look at what's happening in Arizona right now, right, with all of the heat-related deaths. The people who are most likely to experience heat-related deaths are people who are already, have conditions, that make them more vulnerable to heat, right? And these are often the same kinds of conditions that are entangled with, other kinds of inequalities, right? So I think disability and illness are really helpful ways of trying to understand what's happening, because we care about those issues, right? We want to create or at least I hope, right, that we want a world that values and helps support, creates the conditions for disabled and ill people and communities to be able to live good lives and thrive. And the more we have these kinds of environmental intense disasters, but just also the ongoing kind of constant daily reality of heat waves and living in toxic environments, then the harder that is. So I think looking to communities themselves and really listening to what they need
Right.
and what they're calling for.
So, Sonara, for people want to, put their hands on this book, Disabled Ecologies, how do they go about doing that?
Well, you can get the book at anywhere books are sold, and you can learn more about me at my website, sonorataylor.net.
What do you want people to take away after reading your book?
I actually, I actually want people to be hopeful. One of the reasons why I think disability is an important lens versus, say, a lot of people write about how the planet is dying, right? Or like there's this sort of catastrophic end to nature. And the thing about disability to me is that I know that disability can be a profoundly scary and hard experience, right? But we also know from disability communities that people can make beautiful, thriving lives living with disability. And I think that sort of thriving way of living is what I'm hoping for not only disabled human communities, but for our ongoing, now our essentially disabled environments.
So, for people, they know all the platforms where books are sold. You can pretty much get in touch there. It's a great conversation. I want to thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed us having an opportunity to discuss about, ecological issues, because when you talk about social justice, ecological justice is tied to social justice, and
Totally.
and disabilities. Those who live in the disability in that community have to also be tied to that too. And how you've been able to really correlate the two in this conversation has given me definitely some food for thought, and say I got to bring you back. So, Sonara, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. This was really fun. I really appreciate it.
Glad to have you. Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, listen, we're taking a quick break. We got more coming up right after this.
We're gonna start the show right now. This is my favorite part. Ready in 5, 4, 3, 2. Hey, this is Angel, and I am one of the instructors for the in-studio production. Here at BronxNet, we offer classes that can help you elevate, expand, and start your television career. All you have to do is sign up at bronxnet.org/education. For the past 7 years, I have been in various productions, spanning from talk shows, independent films, news reports, art displays, teachings, musical performances, and many more. Ain't that right, Angel? Yeah, you're absolutely right, Angel. There are a lot of creative individuals that we're just waiting to sign up for the class. And if I may, can I also express thank you, Angel. That's all the time we have left. Visit bronxnet.org/education and become a producer by taking the course. The class I offer is also in English, en español y también bilingüe. Nos vemos en la próxima clase.
And we're back. Women continue to face significant challenge, such as earning less than men for the same work, battling discrimination, and juggling work and family responsibilities with little or no support. However, there is one organization on the front lines, and they're leading the charge for systemic change. Through advocacy, policy reform, and educational initiatives, they're working to remove barriers and build a future where women and families, as well as communities, can thrive. Here now to share more, we've got the Director of Advocacy and Policy at Women Employed, Sarah Labadie, and we thank you so much, Sarah, for being with us.
I'm so happy to be here today.
Thank you. When we look at the issue of women and equality and equity, particularly in the workplace, give us your perspective.
I mean, we are, Women Employed has been, as you said, opening doors and breaking barriers, expanding opportunities for women, because there are systemic barriers that face women, especially women of color, and we're working to remove those. We are driven by the idea that that there can be equity and equality for women in this country. And we're pursuing that by expanding access to educational opportunities, advocating for fair and inclusive workplaces, and building coalitions to support issues that we know are important for working women.
Yeah, and as you talk with policymakers, obviously this is something that has been on the forefront for quite some time right now. Are you satisfied with what you're seeing by way of legislative priorities addressing the need for equality and equity for women in the workplace?
I think it's going to be a while before we're satisfied. However, we have seen some great progress in the last few years, especially here in Illinois. One thing I'll name, that we are so excited that happened this year, at the start of this year in Illinois, is the Paid Leave for All Workers Act. So policymakers did support expanding paid time off to all workers in Illinois, up to 5 days of paid time off. And that went into effect in January. And then in the city of Chicago, at the start of July, we also got expanded paid time off as well. So now workers in the city of Chicago have both 5 days of paid sick time and 5 days of paid time off for any reason. So there's definitely a lot of progress that's been made around paid leave, around pay equity, but it will be a while before we're satisfied. We know we need paid family and medical leave. We know we need more funding for education, especially higher education, and more equitable funding for higher education. So it's still a lot of work to do.
So Women Employed has been actually active and working on this behalf for quite some time now. Talk to us a little bit about your vision and your mission and what your hopes are.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've been around since 1973, and we've been on the forefront of nearly every major advancement for working women in Chicago, in Illinois, and in the nation. We help to outlaw sexual harassment and pregnancy discrimination. We've worked to make family and medical leave a reality, though still unpaid in the nation, and we've paved the way for millions to get their degree. And that really, guides our daily work and how we're going to move the needle forward for women, both, kind of starting here in Illinois often and lifting it up to the nation.
And for the nation, obviously, getting acclimated or accustomed to hearing the word Women Employed in the organization. Listen, as you said, you've been on the battlefield for a minute, and you've taken some of these things to the front lines. And when we talk about equity for women, how do you see it playing out from a corporate perspective? You can legislate some things happening, right? But then there's also this corporate awareness where, companies are saying, listen, we've got to do better. We're going to take on some initiatives, stuff like that. How do you see the corporate perspective really embracing women's equity right now?
I think we do see some positive shifts in corporations where, they are taking the time to really consider how well they've been meeting the challenge. A few very prominent organizations and businesses have done internal audits, gender equity audits, to take a look at whether or not they're actually living out their values when they say from, the top down that they believe in gender equity. Is that playing out as it goes on? And I think so many of those prominent businesses are then helping other businesses see that this is a valuable thing to do, that really investigating their own success at meeting their stated values and visions and goals is something they need to take a look at. I still think there's a lot of work to do. We have, embedded status quo systems that we need to review, dig deep into, consider how we make changes. Things like sexual harassment. So one of the things Women Employed does is we do a lot of policy work, but we're also working individually with businesses to help them really go beyond the sexual harassment mandates of just a simple training, go above and beyond that training to really understand what their role is when it comes to ending sexual harassment, in their workplaces and things like that. So a lot of corporations and businesses are interested in those, just as many are not. And so, trying to this two-pronged strategy of ensuring that we have the policies in place that are going to ensure that workers' rights are being upheld and that they have access to benefits and a whole suite of tools that are going to make them successful, as well as working with or corporations that are voluntarily trying to take on really positive progress for women internally.
Yeah, I want to touch base about another particular area. Now it's financial aid and student debt when it comes to women in the educational process. You've got a perspective on it. Please share.
Women employed, so we do a lot of work on workplace fairness and ensuring that workplaces have, good jobs and that all jobs are good jobs. We also know that there are so many women who are looking to either start school or go back to school, to upskill, to shift their careers, to just get a better handle on some aspect of their career, get a degree or a credential. And college is expensive. More expensive than it was 20 years ago, way more expensive than it was 50 years ago, to the point where financial aid is not just a nice to have, it's a need to have for many, many women. And in Illinois, and then in the nation, we do have need-based financial aid. In Illinois, it's called the MAP grant. In the nation, obviously, it's the Pell grant. And those grants, you don't have to pay them back. They cover some of your tuition and fees and other costs, but increasingly not enough. There's unmet need left over. And what that means is that women are asked, women and any student going back to school has to find something to cover that unmet need. A lot of people choose to work like practically full-time and try to go to school around full-time work. There still may be unmet need, and that is when people have to take out loans. And when you exit school, women have 2/3 of the student loan burden here in this country, and that's setting us back. Setting us back as a society, that's setting us back obviously individually, in that our peers who don't have those loans are buying houses, can afford cars and the transportation they need, while too many of us are busy spending that money on paying back our student loans. And we would be in a much better place if we had more financial aid in the form of grants and scholarships and lower tuition and less reliance on loans.
Yeah, I think one thing that we can all pay attention to is the fact that student loan debt has really skyrocketed in the lives of so many people, as something needs to be done with that. I know it affects women. It affects too many people, and I'm glad that there's this relief that's out there for so many people who've had student loan debt, but there's still so much more that could be done. I look around the world and I see people who get free education, or almost, it's not, it doesn't have to be as expensive as it is, but we've got a process that we deal with here in America, and we navigate. Let me ask this question here about the everyday, because women deal every day. What are some of the things maybe that are systemic that women have to face every day by way of barriers and hurdles to climb that maybe we're not paying attention to, that the average person may not recognize?
I think one of them is women are primary caregivers still in this nation. So that means we're the first to get the phone call from school when our kids are sick, more often than not. We're the first ones to say, I've got to go take care of my aging parents. And we don't have a paid family and medical leave country in this nation that helps women stay attached to the workforce while they're being asked to do this caregiving. So what that means is that women are, when their family members get sick and they have to be their primary caretaker as they're getting better, or going through treatment or whatnot, those women are dropping out of the workforce and losing access to the income that they once had, or they're trying to cobble together some version of work and caring for whatever their home life is while also taking care of family members. It's impossible. It's an impossible choice. And in Illinois, a lot of workers don't even have access to unpaid. Like 62% of workers don't have access to unpaid family and medical leave, either because they can't afford to take that time unpaid or because they actually don't qualify for it. So again, they're being forced out of the workforce when they welcome a new child, or they're coming back to the workforce, days later, days after giving birth to a new child. So I think that's one major barrier. We obviously know another major barrier is the gender wage gap, and unequal and inequitable pay that people face every day and don't often even know it. So there's what we need to push back on, and is ways that we envision how we pay people based on what they actually bring to the table, not the wages they brought with them in their old job. We need to be envisioning a new system there as well that ensures that we're not perpetuating pay discrimination from job to job, that's transparent on the part of both the employer and the employee, and that really kind of centers the idea that that pay should be based on what you bring to the job, what the responsibilities of the job are. And I just want to name, all of these things are intersected by other identities that women hold. So pay inequity is worse for women of color. It's worse for moms. It's worse for trans women. So, thinking about how all those intersectional identities have an impact as well.
Yeah. Share with us a little bit about the allies that you've, accrued over the course of time. Obviously, you've got some great allies and people who've been working with you on the battlefield. These are the people I say have boots on the ground.
Absolutely. We are a policy and advocacy nonprofit, which means for us, our connection to working women, we have some, but we don't have the same kind that a community organization does. So all of our work is possible because of coalition. There's really nothing we can do by ourselves. And so, for instance, with the work that we did to secure paid time off in the state, we had a 75 plus member coalition working on that. Fighting for us, alongside us were anti-poverty organizations, labor unions, community organizers, early childhood folks. It was just such a broad and diverse coalition who recognized that having paid time off or paid sick time, whatever, in this case is paid time off for any reason, was so essential to the health and well-being of families and communities. And so we work together with them. At the same time, a lot of the work that we do around sort of career pathways and education, we couldn't do that work without community college partners, without our state agency partners, and without, community-based organizations that work in education and training.
Yeah. So as you look at the work that's being done, coalescing all groups and, getting out there, responding to the issues that are out there, you've got lawmakers, you've got policymakers out there who are really the ones who can really drive this thing across the finish line. What's the relationship like between women employed and policymakers, given the fact that, yes, we are in this middle of this hottest election ever, but arguably ever, but yet and still, there's still other things that need to get done.
Yeah, we couldn't do much of our work without in coalition, but also without elected officials kind of shepherding this work through, taking it from, a bill, an idea, something that our coalition partners and women employed are working together on, that we're hearing from the community that is needed, and taking that from, idea to actual law or policy. So we do collaborate with policy makers from, the time the idea is shaped, getting their buy-in and championship, to the negotiation stage, where we kind of talk through the finer details, continue to push with them. Oftentimes it's helping them really understand the implications of certain decisions. Who's going to benefit if we make this choice in a policy? Who's going to be hurt by that choice? And when we're in the room with policymakers, our goal, Women Employed's goal, and often as a spokesperson for a coalition, is to ensure that the needs of women, especially women of color, low-paid women, are top of mind for policymakers. It's always an essential piece of our work, and helping policymakers who are working on dozens of things, if not more, really understand the implications of different policies is critical to getting the work done, and to getting the work done in a way that really isn't further entrenching the status quo, is making change for working women.
Yeah. And so as you talk about working together works, right? What would be one of the highlights that you can say of how working together works from your perspective? Do you have one that sticks out to the max for you?
Sure. It's still in development, but elements of it are moving forward. So it's sort of an in development piece. So in Illinois, our public universities were sort of funded without any transparency. It was mostly political clout that got them the amount of funding that they got year to year. And as you can imagine, that wasn't necessarily student-centered. That was more university-centered. And from our perspective, from Women Employed's perspective, any funding for our university system needs to be focused on equity. It needs to be adequate. It needs to be stable, and it needs to be transparent. And so with partners, including, universities, including our Board of Higher Education, including advocacy partners and other experts, we launched a commission to really study how would we redesign a formula for Illinois when it comes to public university funding that considered equity, that thought about the students who have achievement gaps, big groups of students with achievement gaps. And in Illinois, that included rural students, adult students, Black and Latinx students, students from poorly funded high school systems and school systems, and envision a new funding formula that really focused on addressing the schools and the students at those schools that had the biggest gaps. And so the commission's report came out in March. We've just launched the bill, the start of actually codifying the formula that was recommended by the commission. But the work that's been done has been about 2.5 years of work, getting to the point where we have a formula and something that we could put into place so that students and the institutions that they attend are getting the funding they need to support them adequately.
And Sarah, before we go, I want to get the opportunity for people to connect with Women Employed and really have the opportunity to see how they can be a part of the organization in terms of support and advocacy, and then also just the awareness. So go ahead and tell us how we can get connected.
Well, the easiest way to connect with us is on our website at womenemployed.org, but we're also on all of the social media. Follow us on Facebook, on X, and on Instagram. You'll find the latest news about what's happening, actions you can take, information about things that you need to know about what's happening for working women and what needs to happen for working women.
Sarah, it's been great talking to you, and best wishes with Women Employed. Come back to us. We'll definitely want to continue the conversation. And as things continue to heat up and we know politically and things are on the rise, we may need your voice to give us a little bit of balance there. So love to have you back.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
All right. And we've come to the end of our show today. Hope that you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Bronx Social Justice Forum. Now, to rewatch this week's edition, you can catch Recablecast right here on BronxNet.org. If you want to join the conversation and present your point of view, visit our social media at BronxNet TV. And join us next week. We continue to elevate the discussion, bringing further awareness on issues across the globe. I'm your host, Daren Jaime, saying take care and God bless.